By the way, I said we'd have some special guests here. We had a bat circling the studio just about 5 minutes ago, so if one of us gets clunked in the head by a bat, you'll know what happened.
Knocked you out of your
Look,
top.
a bat. Did you see that fly through? That was a bat. That's not special effects.
That knocked you out of your top.
This is very trying stuff. Here we were this close to the 8th Emmy Award, this close, and the bat's got it.
Oh, guys,
The bat might push us over.
The bat might push us over.
I see bats all the time.
Yeah. This bat's getting kind of low, Bob. Are you armed today?
Silly question.
Yeah.
But
Now we're going to actually have Chuck standing. I'm telling you, it's going to be a bat clanging to a head. Come on back on the Enrichment Sports Source. Eyes to the sky, everyone. I'm telling you, that bat is either going to clang into the wipey board or right into Chuck in this one. I'm just dodging guano here on the set. What we're going to do
do that
here,
all the time,
yes, that's right. This segment of the Enrichment Sports Source brought to you by the law offices of Ogle, Elrod, and Brill, who I'm going to call to sue this bat. New Year's Eve is the time. This segment, guys, and the bat just came back through low. It flew low in front of the Ogle. See that?
I mean, do you hold your finger up and say, here?
Here's the thing.
You might, I'm not.
Same bat time, same bat channel.
This is the Enrichment Sports Source with your host, John Pennington.
Good Sunday morning and welcome into the Enrichment Sports Source. We have a full cast of characters today. We don't know if the bats will be back. We actually think there were 2 bats last week. There's netting, and I kid you not, there is netting up around the studio. So if that bat gets to us today, it's going to have to do its work. It's going to have its work cut out for it. We have a packed show. We're going to talk Tennessee basketball. They had a good week. Does that keep hope alive? We'll discuss their NCAA tournament hopes. We'll also talk about the LSU game coming up. We got all kinds of stuff to cover today, from Charlie Strong to Bob Stoops to James Franklin to Bruce Pearl. We're talking a lot of different topics on today's show. Brought to you, as always, this first segment, our friends at Enrichment Federal Credit Union. The holidays may be over, but there's still time for one last gift, a gift for you. Consolidate your holiday purchases and expenses into a low-cost fixed-rate holiday recovery loan from Enrichment. Available until the end of February, you can get rates as low as 3.99% fixed APR when you transfer your credit card debts to Enrichment. The Holiday Recovery Loan. Stop by one of their 8 Knoxville area locations and ask them about that, or check them out online, enrichmentfcu.org. All right. Want to welcome in the cast of characters right over here. Jimmy Himes back with us, and I pointed this out on radio Friday. You weren't here, the bat was here. You're here, we see no bat, so I think you may be Batman. We have Jimmy Himes, we have Mark Pankratz, former Vol staff member over there, man who was, you're going to give us our scouting report today on LSU. You're the man who did that kind of thing with UT the last few years. Right over here, Mike Strange, Knoxville News Sentinel, ducking, dipping, diving. Chuck Cavaleris, media mogul, thank you for being with us.
And there's no chance that I'm Bruce Wayne.
There's no chance that you're Bruce Wayne. A vampire, perhaps, but not Bruce Wayne. All right. Vols routed Tusculum 98-51 yesterday in an exhibition game, basically. But back on Monday, we went into this game last Sunday saying, oh, this is going to be a low-scoring, ugly kind of affair. And instead, Tennessee came out, shot lights out, blew Virginia out of the gym 87-52. This is one of the top 10 defenses in the country in terms of defensive points allowed. You saw more efficient offense, as we discussed last week on the show. It's more efficient than I think people thought because they played so slow, but certainly more efficient last week with the shots that were falling. What changed during the Virginia game? Was it just a case of, okay, today you're hot? Or were there other changes made? Mark Pankratz, I'll start with you.
I saw a difference in our urgency level, just pushing the ball up the floor, being more aggressive. And it made a big difference in I think just the guys' overall confidence. And again, we started inside out. You know, we went inside first 2 possessions to the big guys, kicked it out, got open threes, and once we knocked down those first couple, it just became contagious, and our confidence built from there.
So with the urgency, does that mean now 2 weeks ago Mike Strange said Derek Reese is the guy to go to and he plays? Last week we said you got to push it a little bit further and they go out and do it. What do we tell them to do this week?
Go get a road win.
This team, though, this team for the week, including the Tusculum game, shot 54% from the floor and 54% from three-point range. Is that just shots falling, or do you think that's something that you can count on? We now know the high-end potential for this team. How often are you going to see that potential maximized, Jimmy?
I don't think you'll see it a great deal. I think that in basketball, with a 30-something game schedule, you got a handful of games where you don't play well. You're going to have a handful where you play over your head, and you're really defined by the other 20 or so games. One of the keys, though, with Tennessee is Josh Richardson. I mean, here's a guy that started his career, his first 2 years, he was a 22.5% three-point shooter. This year he's shooting 50% from three-point range. Now, I don't expect him to keep that up, but at least he's given them a pretty significant weapon, a threat out there. And with him, if he can continue to not shoot at 50%, but at least shoot a reasonable percentage from three-point range, that's going to make that team a lot more difficult to defend, I think.
And it looked like you actually had an idea of what you're trying to accomplish offensively. You had more movement, setting some screens, getting some making the extra pass, and it was Josh Richardson, because besides Jordan McRae and Josh Richardson, who do you really want taking three-pointers on this team? I mean, Antonio Barton was in a prolonged slump. Those were the guys that you really want taking the shots, aren't they?
If you had told me, based on what we saw against Tennessee, Virginia last year, and just what we know about Virginia, if you told me the biggest margin of victory of the Cuonzo Martin era was going to be against Virginia, I would have laughed and said no way. But it was 35 points. Mark mentioned urgency. I think that is the key. And Josh Richardson, obviously, I think he's the real X factor with this team, and not just shooting three-point shots. If he's just aggressive, going to, hit a three-pointer every now and then, but go to run the floor, go to attack the basket, I think he is a real X factor with this team.
Well, and the reason besides the shot-making thing is because last year his man would clog up the lane for us every possession offensively. He would sit on the backside of the post. We couldn't get it inside. He would sit in the lane, make it impossible for Jordan and Trey Golden at the time to drive it. And now they have to be another 2 feet closer to him, which just opens up the floor for driving and posting angles.
Let me ask you about the players-only meeting. After the NC State loss, the team got together. They said this, they didn't talk about it immediately, but then they talked about it after the Virginia game, saying that it's one thing to have coaches who are always coming down on you say something. It's another thing for your teammates to tell you, hey, you're doing this wrong, you need to improve. Thoughts on the players-only meeting? I mean, teams that lose do those and they don't work.
It's usually a bad thing when you have
Well,
one,
some teams, yeah, exactly. It's a sign of a problem when you do it.
Yeah.
But sometimes they work. I don't know that they work enough that you'd really buy into it.
One thing I saw interesting about this one was it was after the NC State game, which they needed something, some kind of interesting thing I saw was at DeMontre Edwards' dorm or whatever. He's a senior, but here's a guy who basically wasn't playing and had every reason to just hang his head and not be a point, not be a factor, and yet to me the fact that it was at his place indicates that he was still in there with the other seniors.
And then he had his career high yesterday scoring against Tusculum. One last thing here, Robert Hubbs. He's got a nagging shoulder injury. Tennessee fans know all about nagging injuries to basketball players with the Maimon thing last year. Hubbs really hasn't found his stride yet. 5-star player still. How big of an impact is this on Tennessee's team if Hubbs isn't ready for a few weeks?
Well, I said this on Jimmy's show last week, was being in that program, I've never seen a guy that's had to wear that brace and not have to have some kind of scope or something after the season. So it's obviously a legitimate injury. It does have an impact. If you look at the stat sheet, you wouldn't say that because of what he's shooting.
Right.
But he's just one of the only wings that we have. I like Armani coming in and making a difference just because of his energy and urgency on both ends of the floor.
The larger impact to me is just hoping that after a few weeks he can get well, that he can be better. That I think you got enough moving parts on this team, you can plug somebody in and be okay, but you want him to be able to get well and maybe give you a lift midway through the SEC schedule.
Well, you just never like to lose bodies. I mean, let's face it. Now, if another wing goes down, that's just one more hole. So you never want to lose, even if somebody's not starring at the moment, you don't want to lose those bodies, even in practice for that matter.
Well, he's too good of a talent also. He's not going to continue to struggle. Right. And so I think obviously the injury has impacted him, but there was a point in time where you had hoped at the start of the conference play or the middle of the conference play that you would see the real Robert Hubbs. We may not see that depending on how significant that injury is.
And big picture-wise, next year he's going to have to be the scorer for you. So we need to get him as much experience as we can moving forward.
Good point. All right, when we come back, an inside the numbers comparison. Tennessee played 12 non-conference games last year. They played 12 this year, not counting the exhibition game with Tusculum. 8-4 both times. We'll look inside the numbers, though, to try and study where has this team improved, where has it taken a step backwards, has it taken a step backwards? Come on back on the Enrichment Sports Source.